All right. Rob and Frank and I, they graciously accepted my recommendation, which was to break with a bit of convention here and do away with the long introductions. For a couple of reasons. They have so much success and accolades that it would take a lot of time. Also, this is a very well-heeled audience here, and I think you're all well aware of their successes and their careers. And for younger people in the audience that maybe aren't as familiar, the great thing about the younger people in the audience is they're so good at the internet, you can quickly find out everything that you need to know about them. So that allows us, that will buy us more time, and it buys all of you a bit more time at the end to join in the conversation, which Rob and Frank both graciously welcome. So think about your questions, and yeah, I'll make sure that we have time at the end. So let's begin. Rob and Frank, it's a real pleasure. It's rare that you get to sit down with not only one, but two legends of our industry. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation. And that's what it will be. We're just going to have a bit of a chat here about some big themes, and we hope that you kind of come away with this with a little bit more inspiration for creativity and being thoughtful and coming up with some more rigorous investment theses around what's going on in the complex times that we're living in. So I thought we'd start at the beginning, at the very beginning. Where they both came from. If we can maybe uncover a little bit about the secrets to their success in terms of the attributes that they both carried through their careers. Now, Rob, you started, you're a Toronto person, much like myself. Your father was well-heeled on Bay Street, was successful in the investment world. He was a gold investor. I remember you saying that you had conversations around the dinner table about gold. You went to Western, you did your MBA at Schulich. It's in many ways kind of a traditional trajectory that you would think for a life in business. Frank, very different, right? Frank, your parents were Italian immigrants. Your father was originally a miner in Sudbury. A really interesting life story. We don't have too much time for it here, but maybe it comes out in the course of the conversation. But not the same. I mean, you've talked about you've had Christmases where you didn't even have any presents under the tree, that sort of thing. Frank eventually went to Douglas College. He's a bit of a musician, he's playing the trumpet. So again, very diverse backgrounds from when they were young, and yet both of them end up at a very similar high level of success, which proves the adage that it does not matter where you come from, it's all about where you end up. So I'd like to open there, Rob. What do you think it is that attribute, is there an attribute that you can identify that you had even as a child through those years that most carried you through to the success that you've enjoyed in life?
Say, first off, curiosity, extreme curiosity. And secondly, maybe a fascination with science fiction about what was considered impossible. And thirdly, whenever anyone said, you can't do that, it was like a red flag to a bull, that you just charge at it and say, screw off.
Very similar in those things. Curiosity, 100%. I just love learning new things. I always have. And even at my ripe old age, I love taking on a new subject matter and running with it, learning it, and exercising my brain. The it can't be done thing, I have a sign on my desk, and people in my office know this. If they come up to my desk, the sign says, it can be done. Because when I hear it can't be done, it pisses me off.
Exactly.
And that was there for both of you from the time that you were children. That was a motivator for you, hearing that it can't be done. Okay, there you go. A commonality between the two of you. You're both students of history. You both have professed a love for reading history. And not only that, I think it's clear from interviews you've given in the past that you use that historical study to inform your investment theses. So I think that's a pretty good place to jump into what's going on in the world today. Rob, why don't we start with you? From a historical perspective, is there things in your readings that remind you, things from the past, that remind you about where we are today?
History is very cyclical. The metals industry is very cyclical. And we've gone through periods like this before. And this is a time when a lot of stories are selling at very low levels. There's very little interest in the market. And it's usually a very good time to be acquiring. You can think of gold is out of favor. It's almost ignored by most of the market. The the financial crisis, the global financial crisis came along in 06, 07, and in the space of 9 months, the price of gold doubled after Bear Stearns collapsed, but it was out of favor. Today it's almost 90% again from where it was then. So there's this repetition that people forget about. So you look to history for clues, economic history.
Frank, what is your thought on this?
I look at history more from a macro perspective as opposed to the mining industry. And what I see, and I love history. I think history tells you everything you need to know. And once you see history, you realize that the only advancement we've made is in technology. Economic cycles, patterns of economic cycles, super debt cycles, overextending, overreaching, the printing of money happens over and over and over again. And if you want to read a great book, it's Ken Rogoff's book, This Time It's Different, chronicling 800 years of financial folly. And you see these patterns. And Ray Dalio actually wrote his book about the changing world order. That's another fantastic book, which shows you that we are, if you look at history, you will see what's happening today. And then you can make a judgment call at a macro level of what to do with your money. And, you know, I've come to a number of conclusions just by, and I've written a lot about this, is that we don't recognize that we're at the end of a 70-year super debt cycle. We're at the end of the limits of credit. There's been so much debt created. And the reason that I think that happens is because we only ever recognize the experiences that we know from our own lifetimes. Our lifespans are roughly 70 years, give or take. And so we never learn that lesson. And so today I look at, you know, what's happening with our belief system, that we believe that the West will rule forever and that the dollar will remain dominant as a reserve currency forever. And I don't believe that that is true. I think that we will get a very nasty surprise. I think it's inherent in man's nature to destroy every paper currency that was ever created. Every paper currency ever introduced should have come with a box of matches, because they get destroyed time after time after time. And what comes back? Gold. What stays constant? Gold. And so I think we're at the end of a period of time, and there will be a reset of some kind. And I'm not sure how that reset's going to happen, but we will get a reset, and gold will play a role in that reset.
Okay. So you're definitely firmly in the camp then of regime change, which is seldom a peaceful thing if we do have these transitions of power. You've taken us into this kind of macro realm. Let's pursue it for a little bit. Rob, how do you feel about this? Do you feel it portends to a bit of a pessimistic view in the short term? If we feel that it's hard to see as these cycles end. They usually in these transition periods are quite violent and very tough. Do you share Frank's sentiment that we're nearing the end of one of these larger cycles?
Well, first I'd like to add a book to the reading list.
Please.
And The Extraordinary and Popular Delusions, The Madness of Crowds by Charles Mackay. And it goes from about 1100 AD to his time in the mid-1800s in the United States, but it goes through Europe and then America. And it talks about these cycles, fascinations with certain areas, economic changes. So where are we? I think we have extraordinary levels of debt the governments have pushed out. The world is awash with liquidity right now, and money was cheap. And that's about to end. And when it does, it comes to an end abruptly. So, as I mentioned, Bear Stearns and the financial crisis, or you can look to the currency crisis in Asia. And there are all sorts of them going back quite a way. So there's no shortage of them. And it's just, history will give you an indication. It won't give you a perfect guide, but it'll give you an indication of what you should be thinking about.
And there's that adage that things change very slowly and then very quickly. Do you feel that we're getting close to the very quickly?
Yeah, we're gradually falling off a cliff, but it will take perhaps another financial accident, like a Bear Stearns type event, to set into motion a complete collapse or a currency crisis. A crisis in currency, which then brings on hyperinflation and all the nasty stuff that comes with it. So I think we're teeter-tottering now, and if they keep rates at these levels for long, something's going to break, and it's going to break badly, and it's going to create a sort of a vicious cycle of unwinding of all of this debt, 300 trillion plus.
And let's take that into gold. Then, in that scenario, how does that connect to gold? Why does gold become more relevant in that scenario?
It's safe. It has an asset value that's global. You have real estate, you can't move it. It's liquid. You can sell it in 2 days anywhere in the world. It just is a place where people go over the millennia when they fear other things are happening.
Mm-hmm. And it brings up the de-dollarization piece. I mean, this sort of scenario accelerates de-dollarization. How real is the option of the BRICS coming up with an alternative currency, and how does gold factor into their ability to do so?
Well, de-dollarization doesn't necessarily mean a new BRICS currency, although that is in the cards, and it's a possibility, although it's going to be challenging. You know, especially now you got the BRICS Plus. It's not just the BRICS. You got 8 new members and 17 more applicants that want to join BRICS. And to create a common currency, a settlement currency, not a reserve currency, but a settlement for trade currency, might take quite a bit of time, take a lot of hurdles to jump. But de-dollarization is happening regardless by these bilateral agreements between countries, specifically China courting every country in the world to trade in only local currencies and to avoid the entire U.S. dollar system. And that's going to chip away at U.S. dollar demand. Now, is Saudi Arabia going to live up to its threat to start selling oil to China in yuans? I think so. I think that they're already probably doing it and converting those yuans into gold on the Shanghai Gold Exchange. I think that that's already happening. But the chipping away at the U.S. dollar as a means of transaction will have a very negative effect on Americans. And I think that for a long time they've enjoyed this privilege of exporting their inflation to other countries because commodities are priced in U.S. dollars. And then you have all of this global south now, you know, loaded up with debt, sovereign debt, priced in U.S. dollars, and they're hurting. So they're all welcoming the idea of something different. We just don't know what that is yet. But I think it's going to happen, and I don't think America is prepared. I really think China took the opportunity once the Ukraine war started and the sanctions were put on Russia. They saw that as an opportunity to start courting the globe for dance partners, and they're doing a really good job of it. So good now that the Biden administration is now starting to find ways to compete in this love affair with the Global South. You know, the Global South used to be the ugly sisters at the ball. Now they're the Cinderellas. Everybody's courting them. And I get calls from, you know, people going, you gotta, you know, we gotta get you invested in Africa. You know, you gotta go to Africa because the Chinese are there, the Russians are there through the Wagner Group. And they're starting to think, you know, this is going to be a competition. And the only scary thing about this, besides that it will make it the economic reality for the Americans less favorable, is that when these kind of trade blocks create and trade stops or slows, that's when you're in danger of a hot war. And you think about, and you're talking about you call it a regime change, but I'm talking about changing global order, which is what China's trying to orchestrate now, to change in the world order, especially the monetary system. And if you look at history, it's very rare that power transfers from one global leader to another without a hot war. And that's what worries me.
That is a scary prospect. The one thing that sticks in my mind about this thesis, though, is that China is not a democratic country. Rob, do you see a scenario where the new world order could be dictated by a country that is not democratic? I mean, in the West, we're used to certain freedoms and liberties that are not allowed in China. Does that factor into this equation at all?
We had a trucker convoy in Canada, and the government stepped in and took away all sorts of freedoms. They went into bank accounts of people who were supporting the truckers. They made mandates for COVID and that were extremely restrictive, really damaged the economy. You look around, in El Salvador, there's a new president. And throughout Latin America, he's being praised for his really tough stand on crime. He's built a prison, a very large prison, and put 70,000 people in it. Right now, we're seeing a remarkable shift, the populist governments, and I think there are a lot of people saying we're getting a little too far away from the way we were comfortable, and we have to get back there. And citizens are going to start accepting losing control to get more safety and security in their lives. So I don't think we're going to a more open world, we're going to a more closed world.
Okay, interesting. I'm going to bring it a little bit back into gold. Jessica referenced the first Precious Metal Summit, which was fantastic. And the featured speaker, I still remember, was George Wills, the conservative commentator from the States. Brilliant, brilliant person. And he has a quote I remember seeing as a kid watching him on ABC Morning News that was, history repeats itself. Things will repeat exactly as they are until they don't, until something dramatically changes and they don't, right? And with that in mind, everything we're talking about here portends to stronger gold prices. But what's different this time is digital currencies. How do digital currencies factor in to gold as a thesis, as a place of store of value, as a hard currency in this changing world order that we're talking about?
Allow me.
You're on.
His eyes got big before I could finish the question.
I've had this debate often. Listen, first look at gold, okay? It's universally accepted, especially in the East. And we don't pay enough attention to what's happening in the East with respect to gold. It's eternal. It's been around for 5,000 years. It's money, full stop, always has been. It's money. It's a tier 1 asset, according to the Bank of International Settlements. Bitcoin isn't. Central banks are loading up like crazy on gold. The BRICS, the Global South, they're not loading up on Bitcoin, okay? And now you've got all of this talk about central bank digital currencies. There are around 114 countries that are pilot testing the idea of a central bank digital currency. And what they're going to do is hijack the whole digital currency game. And if we ever have a crisis, whether it's a currency crisis or some financial crisis where they have to have capital controls, it is my view that it's very easy to kill things like Bitcoin. You got a bunch of code in your wallet, that's great. What are you going to do if it becomes illegal and they shut off the on-ramps and the off-ramps? What's that worth to you? Gold sitting in your mattress or your safety deposit box, they can't really take that away from you. But they can try, but it's very, very hard. And so I keep thinking that, I always say, never listen to what a central bank has to say, watch what they do. And right now they're screaming, buy gold. And I don't know what more they can do is send you a personal invitation with confetti in it, because it's right there in front of your eyes. They're loading up, and it is my belief they're loading up because there will be a monetary system reset that we don't know what it looks like yet, but gold will play a role. Otherwise, they wouldn't be loading up this way.
Is there any proxies we can get on how much gold China really has? I mean, what's the official number is what, 2,000 tons, America's 8,000 tons.
165. No, you will never get that. And
they'll never give it officially, but is there ways that we can...
No, you can see the import numbers. So if you think since 1995, 46,000 tons of gold. Think about this. 46,000 tons of gold have moved from the west to the east. London and New York vaults are being emptied, and it's all going to India and China. So now you got 46,000 tons going that way. Officially, China says it has 2,165 tons. I don't believe it for a moment. They're the world's largest gold producer. They're the world's largest gold importer. Any mined gold out of China cannot be exported. I think that there are a number of institutions in China that hold gold, and it's not disclosed.
Okay.
And they will disclose it when they have a reason to disclose. And if they ever want to internationalize the yuan, perhaps that's when they'll do it.
Okay. I take it, Rob, you're no lover of Bitcoin as well. Is this something that you think truly threatens gold as currently constructed?
I remember being interviewed by Forbes a number of years ago when Bitcoin was $100. And they said, what do you think of this? And I went, well, maybe it'll get accepted. I mean, prisoner of war camps, cigarettes had big value, chicken bones in concentration camps. You had the South Sea. There were shells that were equivalent. And there was confidence. Never did I think the confidence would get to the level that it has with Bitcoin. But Bitcoin offered something that was very different than any other asset. And that was you could buy it and move it to another country, and it was anonymous. So it led to a great deal of movement of money. But the market was fixed. It wasn't an open market, and there were players in there that could jack it up, and the public looked at it, look, it's going up. And everybody likes something that goes up, so they jump in, and it kept going higher and higher. But we saw with FTX that it was a bit of a sham, and not a bit, a big one. And it started collapsing. And I think, as Frank said, once you get digital currencies, that alternative one disappears.
If anybody's really interested in this topic, the difference between Bitcoin and gold, I did a debate with Michael Saylor, the Bitcoin maxi, over 2 years ago, which is aging like fine wine. And you should go on the internet and watch this thing, because I told him certain things, and we had this big debate. And this was when Bitcoin was $60,000 a coin, and gold was a little bit cheaper than it is now. And he was going around saying, gold's going to zero, Bitcoin's going to $1 million. And it really upset me, and that's why I challenged him. But you got to watch it, because he went through all why Bitcoin's going to rule the world, and I had the opposite argument. So it's a good one if you're interested.
So it ages like fine wine from your perspective, not from his. From his, that wine's gone very sour. It's
Corked.
Yes, exactly. We've touched upon the current circumstances, inflation, increasing wealth gaps, increasing polarization. There's a lot of concerning signs out there. It's harder for the average Joe. Things are more expensive for the average Joe. It's harder to get a decent paying job that covers the bills. Given all that, a conversation has emerged around central bank digital currencies. How much of a worry or a threat is that? The reason why I bring up the other context, it's around if we end up in a situation where a vast majority of the population cannot afford simple things, then the government becomes a provider. And how would it best do that? And what would the implications possibly be for the financial system?
I think it's scary as hell. I think if central bank digital currencies come into play and they're used by all governments or most of the developed world, it will take away a lot of freedom. Because think about it. A central bank can put money in your wallet or take it out. And they may think, well, we're going to fine-tune the economy. So how do we, we want to address climate change. So, you bought one too many cars, or, we want you to reduce eating meat. So, you bought too many steaks this month, and they'll have the power to punish or reward you for your behavior. And I think and cash, if that happens, they'll take away the cash because it gives them more power and more control. And I'm always very wary of governments giving them too much power. It's just going to be bad for everybody.
I think the scariest thing from my perspective is 10 years ago, if you would have said that, I would have said, Frank, you're crazy. It doesn't feel crazy now. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but the fact that it doesn't feel crazy means that we've moved towards that. Rob, do you have thoughts on this?
I'm on the same page.
Okay. All right. Well, then, here's another thing I've noticed about very successful people in my life. They're generally very optimistic. Would you both describe yourselves as optimists?
Absolutely.
Okay.
With a shade of cynicism.
Okay. Maybe that's your secret sauce. Given what we've kind of outlaid here, these aren't like happy themes that we're talking about on stage right now. How do you maintain your optimism? Where do you find optimism given what we've just outlaid right now?
Well, just when we were walking in, Frank was given a piece of core from an exploration property in Red Lake. and you see gold in it. And there's a lot more found. And I found it really interesting because in Gold Corp, we found a lot of gold a mile below surface in a mine that had been going since 1949. And it was thought to be at the end of its life. And there was a gold rush in the 20s. There was a gold rush up there in the late 40s. And then there was a gold rush started by our discovery. And then a couple of years ago, someone came into our office, sat down, and showed me some core from 15 miles away from our mine in Red Lake. And it was Great Bear. And I said, I've seen those intersections before. And bought some. But I thought, why didn't our geologists see that? It was only 15 miles away. We had 55,000 acres there. What blinded them to this? And what Frank showed me is something that they're hitting some great grades, fairly shallow, in the same district that is known for being, I dubbed it the high-grade gold capital of the world when we had our discovery there. So I think there's lots to be found still in the world. And it's just the general market has forgotten about our sector. They'll remember it soon enough. But there's all sorts of opportunity out there. And it's just, and you're starting to see, I mean, there's always a problem that mining was considered evil. It was destroying the environment. And that set off a couple of waves. One, there's no one coming into the industry because they believe what they've heard at school. But you're starting to see another force, a much bigger force out there. The head of the circular economy at Google recently came out and said, if we want net zero, we must have mining. It's not a question we should. It's must. There's not enough metals and minerals to be recycled in this world. So you're going to have Google. We've been talking to Stellantis, bought into our copper project. And it was the first automobile manufacturer to buy into a copper project anywhere in the world. Volkswagen has 16 geologists on staff now. And so you're seeing some of these very large companies that are very much at the forefront of the popular knowledge saying, we have to go into mining. And that, I think, is going to spread and become very pervasive over time. And people are going to look at mining in a very different light and start thinking about embracing it rather than ignoring it.
What can we do as an industry to make sure that happens? Is there things we can do as a propellant to that?
Oh, there's lots.
I'm thinking here of what you're doing at Los Azules. I'm setting you up here for this one. Can you share a little bit about what you're doing there?
Sure. We have Los Azules is a copper project in Argentina in the Andes. And it's quite a large deposit. It's total resources, 37.6 billion pounds. It's got very robust economics. It's modeled to be very low cost, with a really short payback and a long life. So looking at it, about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago, I asked an architect who's very prominent in the green living space to come and talk to us about helping us redefine mining, because we have to change the story. And so he is considered the Steve Jobs of the green living building space. And he's put some really interesting ideas forward and saying, all right, let's look at accommodation for a moment. Let's take the Incas terrace gardens and incorporate that into accommodation. Let's put it into a large atrium it's glass, but it's a very durable, it's not glass, but it's a transparent. You're collecting solar, you're collecting rainwater. It's growing its own foods. There are hanging gardens in there. There's going to be a hotel there. And you think, rather than trying to hide what we do, can we make it a jewel on the landscape that's admired by many? And then start making a place very comfortable to live rather than passable. And look at the mining, and so we're not going to have the traditional, copper mine. we said we're going to sacrifice some of our recovery, and we're going to go heap leach. So we're going to use less than a quarter of the water. We're going to initially have about an eighth of the carbon. And by 2038, we've said to Stellantis will be net zero. All the power is regenerative medicine. It is medicine, but regenerative power. And your food, we're growing our food there, or planning to. It'll recycle its waste. We're cutting down scope 1, 2, and 3 carbon. And so trying to create a model that might be held forward as one that future minds could maybe emulate.
And for you, the stakes are very high. When we spoke in New York earlier this year, you phrased it or framed it as prosperity or extinction. Tell the crowd what you mean by that.
Well, I think our industry is facing a very dire crisis, and that is the enrollment in mining schools of geology, has just disappeared. It's dropped by 80% in a very short period of 20 years or so. And you say, well, where is the youth, the passion, the technology going to come from? Because we also have a problem of a large number of people reaching retirement age and leaving. So the teachers are leaving, and there isn't anyone to fill the gap. So are we going to have to look to AI to help us be more efficient? Are we going to have to import labor from other parts of the world with higher birth rates and train them? But I think the industry could go out of business. The public right now does not like us. We have a hope, as I said, Google and that, if they come on stream. But I do think it's like extinction or prosperity. And we have to move, change the way we look, change the way we operate. And there's been, not to take away from all the efforts that's being done, that is not being known, not known by the public. But we have to take it to a larger audience and stop speaking to ourselves. We have to go to the much broader market.
Perhaps we should do mining courses through TikTok.
That might be the idea of the day.
I wasn't serious.
Frank, through your career in mining, in film industry, back in mining, you've always been quite open about it, so much about the people around you. You've worked with great people. Connecting this to Rob, what is it you look for in people to work for, and how do you inspire young people towards greatness?
It's a great question. Enthusiasm, hungry. I love when I see a young person that wants to be in this business, wants to do well, wants to learn, and is hungry. And you can smell that hunger. And when I see that, I've surrounded myself, I pride in surrounding myself, and I always have, even when I was running Yorkton Securities back in the 80s and 90s, to surround yourself with young people that you can train. And it just gives me great joy. And I look for character, okay? I have a rule, I don't work with dicks. That's rule number. I don't care how big the deal is, I just don't work with dicks. And I like working with honest people that have good character and that are hungry to learn. And that's what I've got. I've got an office full of geologists, engineers, and friends, and corporate finance people. They're all sitting here in the audience. It's probably half the audience. And and they're great. And it's great. It gives me energy to watch them want to achieve something. I love creating stuff, but I'd hate to do it on my own. And I know a lot of mining promoter executives that do it all on their own, and they do very well. But I always wonder how happy they are. Just they own it all. It's their baby. They don't really have a team of people that like them. They're really harsh on their people, and to me, that's always turned me off.
What's it all for, right? Yeah. Let's bring it back into the kind of and let's pick your brains a little more around investment. With a little more of a positive light than the last time we talked about where we are in terms of cycles. Does where we are within the mining sector right now, which seems to be the world is waking up, we know we need way more metal, there's not enough, and yet we're not getting the valuations that we should be getting. Does that change your thesis a little bit in terms of if I broke it down between interest in early stage exploration, later stage exploration, development, producers? Where do you like to put your dollars at this particular time, or does it not change at all? Why don't we start with Rob, then we'll come to Frank.
You mentioned we were optimists. So I tend to look at the exploration end of the business. That's where I've had my largest success, and going from there into production. Now, after I left Gold Corp, I started something and we put it together at the top of the gold market, 2012, so we rode it downhill to 2015. Then it ran back up. Then it went back down. And then operations, we put some things into operations, and I bought distress, and with distress comes problems that don't always get fixed right away. So, and then operations didn't deliver on guidance for a couple of years, and I felt like a seal off the north coast of Newfoundland about to be harvested. And it just went for quite a while. That said, it's turning around, and I think right now is a delicious time to be buying. It's just everybody, there's a little groundswell going, but I can look at our stock. In the last year, we're up 140%. And we beat the Dow, the NASDAQ, gold, silver, copper, and the GDX and the GDXJ. And that was driven, one, by copper, and two, to a lesser degree, the starting the turnaround of our gold and silver assets. I just think it's a good time. I go back to history and cycles. I just feel we're in that window where we're going to see movement that is going to be very positive.
It's buying time. Frank, you've said in the past that you like to focus more on development and producers. Has that changed?
Well, traditionally, I've made all of my wealth, most of my wealth, by sticking to that formula, the buy and build formula with deposits and operating mines and creating something bigger. That's how I did it. However, now that I'm surrounded by all of these young, enthusiastic people, I'm actually putting money into exploration for the first time. Like, thank you. West Red Lake Gold, which I'm a major shareholder of, there's a big exploration component to that. And you get stuff like this where you can actually see the gold from the back of the room. And that's exciting. Black Wolf copper and gold. Greenfields exploration. We may hit, we may not, but it sure looks attractive. And if we hit, it's a huge win, and that's exciting. So I've seen the light now. I'm coming into exploration slowly.
Well, it takes away one. I was going to ask, when you achieve the levels of success that both of you gentlemen have, how you stay motivated and what keeps you excited. Sounds like exploration. It sounds like modernizing the mining industry in a way that's attractive to people is giving you a lot of juice, Rob. Does that encapsulate it, or are there other things?
Mother Nature's been very kind to me. And I recognized early on that it spreads wealth when you get a good mine going. And you can see people gain financial independence. And I think one of the largest things that I've enjoyed about mining is the number of people that have become independently wealthy, in the sense that they could choose where they wanted to work. And having that liberty, giving them that freedom, and it came from treasures in the ground. It also, it's allowed me to pursue some social causes that I feel very strongly about. Regenerative medicine and stem cell research, where my wife and I are very active, and then leadership programs in the schools of architecture and the like, where it just looks like you can take the time you've expended and what you've created can create far more benefits beyond what you're doing. And that is extremely satisfying.
Frank, you're very philanthropic as well. What guides your philanthropic giving?
Well, I changed my life some 17 years ago when I made a very fundamental decision to focus most of my time in philanthropy and less time in business. And I have a number of foundations that I've created and run that do all sorts of things, like preventing deadly conflict around the world through crisis group, alleviating poverty in Latin America and the Caribbean, refugee resettlement around the world, food intelligence, food education. So that is my life. The mining stuff is my hobby. I love doing it because it's fun. And it's fun working with people and making discoveries and making money. It's great. But my life is my philanthropy.
I think a really interesting one as well is the Quantum Gravity Institute that you're part of. And from the angle, again, of optimism, can you tell the audience a little bit what that is about and what that might mean for the future?
Without putting them to sleep.
In a nutshell, Frank, in a nutshell.
So we created an institute called the Quantum Gravity Institute. And just very briefly, okay, there are two theories that have served our world for the last 100 years. General relativity, which is Einstein's theory, and quantum mechanics, which came shortly after that. Two perfect theories. One governs space, time, and gravity, and the other governs, light and matter at the subatomic level. Theories that are perfect but contradict each other. And for last 70 years, people, including Einstein, have beat their head against the wall trying to come up with what used to be called the unified theory, which is now a theory of quantum gravity. How do you combine these two? How do you reconcile? Will it be a combination of the two, or will it require a new theory that we don't even understand yet? And let me tell you why it's important. It all sounds very kind of wonky stuff, and that should be only of interest to scientists. But you have to understand everything in our modern society and economies is powered of either general relativity or quantum mechanics, especially quantum mechanics. And 100 years ago, when quantum mechanics was first discovered, that the theories were first put out there, no one had any idea what would come from it. It was a theory that said, God, there's got this weird thing called entanglement, superposition, and matter behaves weird at the subatomic level. It doesn't make any sense. Einstein called it spookiness at a distance. It was just weird stuff. But as a result, we ended up with semiconductors, microchips, solar panels, LED, modern agriculture, modern medicine, everything in GPS systems wouldn't work unless you understood general relativity because gravity affects time. And so you have all of this tech. We would be living in a early 20th century society were it not for quantum mechanics and general relativity. Why is that important that we find the theory of quantum gravity? If we ever do, it will change things that we can't even predict right now. And now Kip Thorne, who's part of our institute and won the Nobel Physics Prize and wrote Interstellar, the movie. I don't know if you guys seen that. He has a theory that if we ever figure out quantum gravity, we can actually time travel. Because time, as we know, is not what we think it is. Time is fungible. You can stop it, you can speed it up, you can go backwards, you can go forwards. And anti-gravity devices. Things we can't even dream up if we ever figure this out. So our institute is going to focus on those theories that can either be tested through experiment or observation. And so there are a number of theories that can't be tested, like superstring theory. Beautiful theory in math, but you can't, to test it, you would need a particle accelerator the size of the galaxy. It's just because, the theorized graviton is a billion times weaker than the strong nuclear force. And so you can't test these things. They're great theories. So we found certain theories that exist where we're creating the experiments now to test those theories. And one in particular, which actually has been designed by Kip Thorne, if that one proves that quantum behavior can exist at scale, it will change everything overnight. So we're pretty excited about that.
Which is why I wanted to go there. Again, while it might feel like storm clouds are gathering sometimes in many ways, there is exciting things. Quantum computing, nuclear fusion, AI, where do we stand on AI? Rob, do you think AI is going to be a net positive for the sector and for society at large, or a net negative?
I think it could help us make the process more efficient. I think it could help us train people. There was a competition, you might remember, there was Big Blue playing against chess and defeating the chess champion. Well, they had something called AlphaGo. There's an Oriental game called Go. It's stones on a board, and you're trying to get the biggest area behind your wall. So they created AlphaGo, and they took a fellow 18 times world champion in Go and played it. He got them to a stalemate a couple of times, but AlphaGo won. And it did a couple of moves that none of the experts expected. And that move is now a standard move in a game. So you start thinking, can we use that machine knowledge to show us the way to work better, faster, more efficiently, and help us train to operate faster? Now, there are people out there right now talking about putting chips in your brain to complement your cognitive ability so that you could keep up with the machines. But I think we look at the machine as training, helping to make us more efficient in what we do.
I'm slightly less optimistic. The problem with AI, the only problem that I see for AI, coming from AI, is that there are very few jobs that won't eventually be replaced or can be replaced by AI. Very few. And you think about it, you got ChatGPT-4 right now, writing scripts or, writing formulas and code, and it's learning, self-learning at an exponential rate. So what I think, you have to ask yourself, what's going to happen to our world where jobs can be replaced with AI? You're going to have a very small part of the population that will benefit from this, the elites, the rich and the powerful, and you're going to have 99% of the population potentially unemployed. So all of that productivity growth is great, but what good is it going to do you when the hungry mob comes out with the pitchforks? I mean, it's just it's scary, and the fact that there are no control mechanisms yet in place, although people have tried to create rules so that we can control AI, it's not happening, even in the US. And then you got China. China is not going to cooperate with America on AI. And they're pouring tens of billions of dollars into it, including and also with quantum communications. And they're not cooperating, so you're going to have a thing that we don't understand yet how it teaches itself, let loose on the world. And if you want to read a really great book on this, Max Tegmark's book, Life 3.0, it explains the danger of AI without being alarmist, that there are things that we have to consider. AI completes a task. It doesn't give a damn about human morality or human life or anything. It's given a task to do, and it finds the most efficient way to do it. And if you get in the way, tough for you.
Geez, Frank, thanks. I was trying to take us to a more happy place as we approach the end.
Yeah, you wrecked my story.
Let's try to get a happy remembrance. The two of you do have a connection through Gold Corp and Wheaten River. Can you talk to us a little bit about your remembrance of those days, and maybe a little bit lessons for today about what the valuation thesis was then, because it did create a heck of a lot of value. It was a great Canadian success story.
Well, it started, I had at one point decided I wanted to leave Gold Corp. I'd started it, and I just felt that the compliance issues, corporate governance was getting excessive. I spoke about that bull and the red flag. I felt like I was charging at all these well-intended regulations, but poorly administered. And I saw my board getting very preoccupied with compliance rather than building value. And I said, I don't want to waste my time doing this. We want to build value. So I said, okay, I'm going to leave. We had $400 million in cash. We had no debt. We were the lowest cost gold producer in the world. And I said, this is a good time to leave. I didn't really know what I was going to do after that, but my bank account was good, and I thought I had time to think about that. So before I left, I was thinking, well, one day I went to a lunch, and Ian Telfer was making a presentation on Wheaten River, and I looked at it and said, well, they're producing almost the same amount of gold as us. They're trading at about a third the value. And if we put those two together, we could do quite something. Now, Frank was involved with this, and I talked to the guys at Griffiths McBurney, and they said, well, let's go to Vancouver and have dinner with Frank and Ian. And Frank bought out a couple of good bottles of wine. We talked about it, shook hands, and the deal was done. Well, sort of like that.
A few bumps, but we got the deal done. And it was the greatest gold mining deal in history, in my opinion. We had a book written about this. It was called Out of Nowhere. And we just did it for friends and people involved in the deal, where they interviewed everybody involved from concept to the end of the story. And you think this thing, and it was truly out of nowhere. It was a concept. I came up with this theory about gold. I wrote an article, and then I convinced a whole bunch of people that we had to build a gold mining company, because that gold was going to go up. And gold was $250 an ounce. And so that's how it started. But anyway, it went from a $20 million value to $50 billion in 10 years. It was the best performing gold stock in that era.
It's absolutely extraordinary.
It never happened again.
It's absolutely extraordinary.
Yeah. I mean, you look at it, Red Lake, when I bought it, everybody thought it had 3-year life. It had a history of bad labor relations. It was very high cost. And it turned into one of the best gold mines in the world. But we put $10 million into exploration, and 6 months later, my head of exploration came back and said, hey, we got something you might like. I said, what's that? Well, we have 9 drill holes, and the average grade is 9 ounces per ton. 9 ounces per ton, and the average width is 8 feet. And from there, it took off like a rocket. It was extraordinary. And then we started withholding gold, because my largest expense was taxes, income taxes. And I thought, well, if we held back our gold, we first held back 10%, and then 30% of our production we didn't sell. And it increased our financial assets by the reciprocal of our tax rate. So, and you could borrow against the gold. And it was just it was a great way to move along. And we were trading at 3 times NAV, right up there with the best. And so the Wheaten River Gold Corp was a story, said, we're not going to pay much of a premium. I think we paid a 7% premium. I argued for no premium. And they were trading at about a 1 times NAV, us at 3, and I figured we'd go to at least a 2. But we went beyond that. And that's where I think the industry has to look at sometimes unrealistic expectations about what they're going to get initially. And it's the nominal value that is the deceiver. Because they say, well, we're going to give you this premium. But as soon as someone pays that premium, it's taken out of the hide of the acquirer. And if you put the two together, then you're ending up with less than you started with. So it's better to go in and say, let's put these together at this price, and there's a better chance of both parties moving up rather than just one.
Excellent. We're going to turn it over to the audience. Before we do, given that Red Lake is your old stomping grounds, and given that Frank is the new kid on the block with West Red Lake Mines, do you have any advice for Frank now that he's in that territory?
Keep exploring. Just keep pushing that. And reinforce. It's a high-grade gold capital of the world.
There you go. Frank, do you have any advice for Rob on anything in life in general?
Buy some West Red Lake stock.
All right, we do have a few minutes for the audience questions. I think Jessica has a microphone here if anyone wants to. Right here in the front, Jessica. This gentleman here.
Thank you. This is for Frank. Although I agree that cryptocurrencies definitely struggle to store value, I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, where does someone young buy gold? And where do we store it?
It depends how much gold you're buying. A young person, I would assume, would have limited resources. You can easily buy gold coins, maple leafs, and you put them in your safe at home or the bank, or somewhere safe. I mean, for a young person, it's easy. I mean, a gold coin is $2,000. I mean, you buy a stack like this, you're already at 50 grand. So I don't think it's a problem. I mean, I've heard, that there's whole debate about, digital currencies being the new gold because, gold is outdated. I don't buy it. I don't buy it because I think it's unproven, and it'll have to be tested through a crisis. And we haven't seen a crisis yet that tests things like Bitcoin. And my guess, knowing how governments behave when they're under siege, is that it won't be pleasant for anything that they can attack. And they can easily attack Bitcoin. And again, you want to buy Bitcoin, knock yourself out. But to me, it's a speculation. It's not a store of value. I want to sleep at night. I want to have gold that I know I'm going to wake up in the morning. It's not going to be down 50% or put out of business because it's not been tested. And I have lots of other issues. The lack of transparency in these crypto markets and the amount of fraud and manipulation. It's just not for me. Now, I may be proven wrong, but for the moment, to me, I'd rather keep my money in gold.
You might want to buy sooner than later. There's some examples in history of the government denying the ownership of gold. In America, that was in 1933. In Argentina, where inflation is running at 100% a year, you're not allowed to buy gold.
And gold has gone up. And here's the other thing, that people, we live in an economy in countries where we haven't experienced hyperinflation, okay? My father, we lived in Argentina when I was a little boy. I was there till I was 9. And my father left, he saw the writing on the wall, things were going badly, and he wanted to move us back to Canada. And so he moved us out, and he had a couple of businesses that he owned with partners that he tried to sell. He got into some lawsuits with his partners. By the time he got his money out, hyperinflation had set in. It was worth nothing. It was wallpaper. He lost everything to hyperinflation. And we don't get that here. And we think that it will never happen here. You look around, you look what in Argentina, which is experiencing 100% inflation a year, gold has gone up tenfold in the last 3 years in peso terms. In Turkey, gold has gone up fivefold in Turkish lira terms in the last 3 years because people lose confidence in the currency and they buy gold. And you can only measure paper currencies against gold. They're all digital abstractions. They don't mean anything. When you compare them to each other, it doesn't mean anything because they're all abstractions. And that money doesn't exist. It's all credit. The real money, if everybody went to the bank to get their money out, there's not even a tenth of it there. And so the whole system is based on trust. When trust is lost, when you get a crisis, people will, and you'll see hyperinflation sets in when the domestic population loses faith in their domestic currency. And that hasn't happened in the U.S. yet, but it could happen.
Another question here, John?
All three of you have tremendous experience in cycles, and we're talking about financial cycles. How do you feel currently in terms of, with this inflation, access to capital for doing the dream of exploration? In your experience, is this a low time? Is this pretty typical, or what do you guys see kind of in terms of access to capital? I think many companies are finding it challenging at the current markets, and we see this great demand. So how do each of you, and all three of you, have a great experience in this?
The market right now, investors seem to have walked away from the sector, but there is money out there, and it might come from unusual sources. The copper project we have in Argentina, in the last 18 months, we've raised $267 million US without going through the normal channels. There are places in the world right now, Saudi Arabia, which has a lot of money, and it's opened the doors to mining. I mean, it's really refreshing to see what the Saudis are doing. They're laying out all their geological data. They're inviting the mining industry to come in there. It's a very prolific part of the world for minerals. And it's a huge change from what it was. I remember when I was at Corp, we looked down on Saudi. They're just opening the doors, they're providing money. So I would say there's some sharks out there too. There are the royalty and streaming companies.
Do
And
tell.
To me, I look at them, there are a lot of mining companies that have made Faustian bargains. And the devil has been that smiling royalty or streaming company with the dollars in the hand. And you can see the damage they've done to our market. You just look at it, and they took the profit margins, they took the upside, they took the resilience out of the companies, and the performance of the producers is down here, and the royalty companies are up here. Now, that was an easy way to get money. It's like the sirens on the Rhine drawing sailors to the rocks.
Oh, that's a powerful metaphor. Frank, we're time
Well, you
up. The
can't
last
disparage
one
all
goes-
royalty companies, okay? It's a business, and it's a great business. We're going to launch something very new and very novel. It'll be the first one of its kind in the world. It's going to be a royalty company owned and controlled by First Nations in Canada. So we're taking all of the royalties that came from benefit agreements. We're starting with the Nisga's, Charles Morvan, sitting right there from the Nisga'a Nation, northern British Columbia. And we're going to launch this where they basically put all of their royalties that they get from the benefit agreements into a new company, which they will control, we will finance, and then we're going to acquire other royalties from other First Nations groups across Canada. This is going to change the entire industry. So I just want to throw that plug in for royalty companies again.
I'm just talking about the damage that's done to the industry by selling royalties and streams, that it seems that a lot of people who sold them never took math in school.
Well, we wanted to leave people with food for thought, so I think mission accomplished. Gentlemen, it's really a pleasure to sit down and have you guys be so forthright and share so much of your knowledge and experience in such an honest way. So thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for being here.
Thank you, Anthony.